This is Talking Infrastructure, the podcast brought to you by global infrastructure consultancy AECOM. This episode was recorded in front of a live audience at the UK's Real Estate Investment and Infrastructure Forum in Leeds, more commonly known, of course, as UK REIF. Our expert panel was tasked with explaining how they can protect heritage, but also use it to power renewal. I was along for the ride to ask the questions. I'm Toby Sadler. Welcome to Talking Infrastructure. The panel focused on how we can modernise and reuse historic buildings without losing what makes them special. We looked at how different organisations can work together on site to find practical and affordable solutions that protect heritage, preserve traditional skills, but still meet modern needs, and how we can use old buildings to help strengthen local identity and help places respond to environmental and social change. On the panel, we had Tom Foxall, Regional Director, London and the South East for Historic England, Sophia Negus, the Regional Director, Building Engineering at AECOM, Alistair Travers, Design Partner at Purcell, Christine Davis-Worth, Head of Heritage at Building Design Partnership, and Richard Jessup, an Associate at Atkins Realis. We started with introductions, Tom Foxall leading the way.
Thanks, Toby. Morning, everyone. My name's Tom Foxall. I'm the Regional Director at Historic England for London and the South East. I've worked for the organisation for about 20 years, so a good chunk of my career. And I'm particularly interested in planning and how heritage works in that system and how we can help to enable great solutions through the planning system. I am especially, though, interested in how heritage can power growth. And I'm very keen to talk to you about that today.
Perfect. Thank you, Sophia.
Hi, I'm Sophia Negus from AECOM Building Engineering. I've been with AECOM for about 20 years. I've been working on heritage refurbishment projects for a large part of that time. Today, I suppose I'm going to give a bit of an engineer's perspective on how we can work collaboratively to achieve clients' technical requirements and balance fabric intervention and support heritage refurbishments, which are ultimately a sort of catalyst for growth and anchor points within our cities and places.
Perfect. Thank you. Alistair, let's hear from you. Great. Thanks, Toby. I'm Alistair Travers. I'm an architect and partner with Purcell. And I'm very lucky in what I do because I get to work on just some amazing projects. Some of them are quite large. We're doing a very exciting project at the British Museum at the moment with Lena Gottmay Architects. And some of them are quite small. We're doing a project at the Temple Church, which is the 12th century Romanesque sculpture around the door. And it's just a door, but it has incredible power and meaning. And I guess that's one of the things I really enjoy about working in the heritage field is that the value of these places and buildings and structures is irrespective of scale. And it's both incredible real and tangible. It's there in the stones, but it also has a meaning and an ability to connect people outside of just the stuff it's made out of. Perfect. Thank you, Christine.
Hello, I'm Christine Davis-Worth. I'm an architect, accredited conservation architect and a heritage consultant at BDP. And I've recently become the new head of heritage, which is quite an exciting role. And we're going to see how that grows throughout this year and beyond. I've been at BDP for about 12 years now, and I've been privileged to work with a lot of really exciting historic buildings at all scales. And I'm super excited about the adaptive reuse of historic structures, but also historic places and how those can be reinvigorated and reinvented so that people can continue to enjoy those for future generations. And I think with my sort of heritage consultant hat on, my starting point is always, what's the risk of doing nothing? And I think in most areas, you always need to do something. So it's about managing that change and what is that something? So hopefully we can have a good discussion about what that something could and should be.
Should make full sense. Richard, go on.
Thank you. Morning all. My name's Richard. I'm an associate with Atkins Realis. I trained originally on the tools. I was a restoration plasterer for 15 years. And also trained as an installer of retrofit measures on hard-to-treat buildings, also included listed structures. I retrained in 2014 following an MSc in building conservation, and then later on achieved accreditation with the RICS in conservation. And Yes, I've been lucky enough to work on some really interesting projects, which are sort of from Churchill's maps, conservation project, to iconic buildings and structures. Lucky to have worked on Houses of Parliament, and also to date, my favourite place that I've worked is Portsmouth Naval Base. And as a building surveyor, I think I sort of have this interesting role where I can bring that building surveyor point of view to heritage projects, and so we can have that broader conversation about how best to manage change. And as Christine said, I'm keen on that idea. We always start in heritage with the do nothing principle, but I also think we also have to have this do something principle is also important part of the conversation.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So those you can see, we're a wealth of experience here. Tom, let me start with you. Sort of slightly big picture, I guess. Thinking about, how can heritage or genuinely act as a catalyst for economic growth, rather, I suppose, as some might say, act as a constraint on development, which I'm sure is not what you're going to tell me.
It's not, no. I often get the sense in conversations I have with people that they think of heritage as being a kind of luxury, a kind of icing on the cake, something they don't necessarily have to do. But actually, I think it's worth us starting this conversation by recognising that heritage is already an economic powerhouse. It contributes about £40 million to the economy each year. It employs 500,000 people. It adds value to houses in conservation areas and near listed buildings. So it's already contributing greatly to the economy. And that's a really important starting point, I think. But it's worth recognising that it can do more. And actually, I think heritage can play a really key role in unlocking all kinds of growth across this country. Most particularly in relation to housing. We've done some research recently that demonstrates that you could provide up to 670,000 new homes by repurposing underused or unused historic buildings. That's a huge number across the country. And we launched yesterday our Heritage Investment Prospectus. Hope some of you were at the launch yesterday, which highlights some opportunities for buildings which could be repurposed, particularly into housing. So there's a great collection of opportunities there in relation to housing. We're also involved in new towns. How can you build on the identity of local places to create character and add value and give meaning to local places? Infrastructure projects, how can you deliver large infrastructure at scale in a way that responds positively to the historic environment? So across the board, heritage can play a really important role in delivering growth across the country.
Thanks, Tom. It's a bit interesting. Tom said we can do more, but there's a whole range of areas that we can do more on. When you're looking at projects like this, what's your sort of, motivation there? What are you looking at as the opportunities and things where you can get involved?
Yeah, I think it's always challenging, isn't it? Because our requirements for buildings and heritage assets have changed, and we've become more power and data hungry. And all of that takes space, and it needs to go somewhere, and you need to fit it in. And at the same time, we want to improve things like fire safety, and again, that has an impact on the heritage fabric. And it's about how do we balance all of those things, all of those technical requirements that make things fit for the modern day, but also respect what's there and mean that they can continue on and be great places that people want to live in, work in, visit, because they do they do have a value. They are anchor points to the community, and people always have a view. There's a whole range of stakeholders that will have a view on some of these iconic buildings and assets, and it's a juggle of balancing all of those things. There's no one answer, and there's no one size fits all solution, which is why I suppose we've all got our part to play in doing that.
Yeah, fair enough. We're not going to get to that one conclusion at the end of this hour, so fair enough. I'm bracing for that disappointment. Fair enough. Alistair, I wanted to get some of the sort of practicalities of it. I guess what makes that repurposing or adaptive reuse successful in practice? What do you actually have to do?
Well, I think a lot of the times these historic buildings are buildings which have a meaning in the communities they are in already. They've been there for years, decades, centuries. And sometimes their use has lapsed, sometimes they've fallen into disrepair, sometimes they just need a bit of love, but often the community values them for what they are already. For example, in our project at the Hull Maritime Museum, Hull is a maritime city. It included 2 ships as well as building structures. A different example, a project of ours at the Hunstanton School built in the 1950s, but 3 generations of the local community have been educated there, sometimes boiling in the summer, freezing in the winter, but it was, generations identified with that structure. And actually with that project, the most important thing, more than any part of the building fabric, was for that building to still be a school and to still have that role in the community. It was designed as a school to enable it, whilst that required quite a lot of change and alteration to the building fabric. The most important thing that all of the stakeholders agreed on right at the start was, in a sense, the mission for that project was to keep that building active as a school and to keep that role in the community. So I think harnessing the value of these buildings and structures to the communities they are part of is absolutely vital.
Fair enough. I mean, we always, I come to you, Christine, because we talk about identity a bit there, aren't we, in terms of what these buildings mean, themselves, but also for the places that we live. When you're looking at projects, and again, you're trying to use modern tools to save these places, how much of that is in your mind where you're thinking, I need to know at the core what this building stands for and what does it mean to the community?
Yeah, so I think there's probably 2 notable examples there for BDP. One that we delivered a number of years ago, which was Oldham Town Hall. Because I think the other thing we're really passionate about at BDP is obviously there's a lot of work in the big cities, but the northern towns where perhaps there hasn't been historically investment, it's really important to sort of partner with local authorities. So there, Oldham Metropolitan Borough Council's ambition was to bring the old town hall back into new uses. It was on the Victorian Society's top 10 buildings at risk. It was pretty much game over for this building. But it was the town hall. It was the people where people paid for their rates in the Borough Treasurer's Rates Hall. And there was a real passion within the community to bring this building back into a new use. So we looked at the need, and it wasn't needed to be the town hall, but it could be a cinema and leisure destination, a place, heritage-led placemaking. So that's been brought back into use. It's been very successful. And then that's been, again, a catalyst for growth across Oldham. The Spindle Shopping Centre opposite it, which obviously is a late 20th century building, but they went, the Oldham Town Hall looks really shiny and new. We really need to sort of give the rest of the town a bit of a spruce. So that's been really positive. And then the other project is Dewsbury Arcade. So again, working in partnership with Kirklees Council and looking at their blueprint for Dewsbury and how strategic projects like the market and the arcade can, again, bring people together. They're places that people associate with gathering. And that's been really important to create those gathering spaces where people can meet and sort of be part of the community.
Richard, I wanted just taking on from that, then that's saying that we're doing this work on this particular building, but we are hopeful that itself is going to start to change things around the building and in that environment. Do you feel that sort of burden of responsibility when you take on a project, or are you just focusing on doing your work well, using your crafts and making, and what will be, will be?
No, 100%. I think, the process is layered, as we all know. And I think we've got at the top where we have these overarching ambitions about what we want to do, which everyone has discussed, those sort of broad principles, etc., about how we understand place and how we manage change, if that's what we're going to do in that area. But following on from what's just been said too, this idea of what is community and what is placemaking, down at that sort of communal level of heritage value, which is the one that I personally feel the strongest thoughts and feelings for what does a place mean to its local community. The idea of sort of regeneration and renewal for me, and also being from the tools and being a building surveyor, working to the project phases of change, is that we have an opportunity to engage with young people, to train them, to upskill them, to get them involved within that construction sector too. And it's not just about teaching your hands to do something. When you do that, you get a huge amount of satisfaction from that taking place. And that adds value to the local community. And if we're looking to create a community in placemaking and have all those amenity values, strengthen community. Those things I think are really important. It's only the other day that I thought, God, what's happened to all the brass bands? Where have they all gone? And I just thought that element of our heritage from 100 years ago that has slowly changed. If we don't notice these little changes that take place and stuff goes and new stuff comes in. And I just thought, well, that really galvanized, brass bands and pubs, the two go together. And I thought, I've never experienced that. So, and I would love to have done. So yeah, when I'm thinking about a place, absolutely that sense of what it is, where it is, who was there before, who is there now, what do we hope to get from it? Really, really important.
If you want to join in Richard's brass band, feels like it's your recruitment exercise. So that's looking back in terms of, I suppose, the legacy potentially lost. But Tom, I suppose part of this is looking forward, that sense of identity. I know this is part of your kind of remit as well. How do you make sure that works?
I think the key thing to think about in relation to any project is the opportunity. And I think very often in heritage, people kind of approach it in a much more defensive way. What are the constraints? What are the issues? What are the pitfalls? What are the things I'm going to come up against that I'm really scared about? I think we need a complete shift in mentality and think about heritage as being an opportunity. We know it is. We know that the vast majority of the population really like historic buildings, historic places. There is a genuine warmth towards historic buildings and places. And yet, for some reason, we've got ourselves into a place where we don't see that as an opportunity. We see it as a barrier, potentially. And I think, from my point of view, the key thing that Historic England can do is to change that perception into a positive one. And I'm really keen that, for example, anyone who comes to us to talk about a project that they want to take forward comes to us and receives helpful, enabling, constructive advice that aims for a solution. And that feels to me to be the most important thing that we can do. I appreciate that isn't probably everyone's experience at the moment. So that is not necessarily with Historic England, but there's a kind of web of decision makers across heritage projects. And I think it's really important that we develop a culture which is about looking for solutions, looking for the opportunity. And I feel really passionate about that because heritage can contribute so much to society, and it feels like we are missing that opportunity at the moment. Let's grasp it and let's go and do great things together.
Since I was about to storm out.
Yes.
Rise up and go. Before we start picketing things, Sophia, come to you. Just want to talk about, just move on to climate a little bit, because obviously when we talk about new build projects, all of that stuff is built in. We need to think about the environment and so on and so forth. Where does heritage fit with that? How do we make sure that we can, protect these assets, that they've got climate resilience built into them, so they're kind of future-proofing, but also making sure we preserve the past? How do you balance that out?
Yeah, I mean, it's always a challenge, isn't it? Because if we think about climate and climate change, there's been a shift. We have, I suppose, storm weather events, higher rainfall intensities, hotter summers, colder winters, and some of these buildings, weren't designed with that in mind. And there is a consideration for what we do in terms of how we protect them. Do we need to sort of upgrade some of the sewer connections so that we reduce the risk of flooding to some of these assets? And those are all things that we can do to sort of future-proof and help protect them for what we foresee to be coming. And we can upgrade the energy efficiency, but you've got to balance what you do with the fabric, and you've got to choose pragmatic solutions that kind of respond to what's there. And there's always the sort of debate about can you put heat pumps in a heritage building, and there's the no, you can't, and yes, you can, but you've just got to balance how you do it and what you want to achieve. So there's always a solution there.
Great.
It's just how do you work around it, and there's no one size fits all. So you've got to bring together kind of all of your collective expertise to try and get that answer for that particular problem.
Also, do you feel that sustainability is that default position now in heritage? That's where we're looking at.
Yeah, absolutely, Toby. And I guess I've two thoughts really on this. And I think the first is, I think historic buildings actually often perform far better than they're given credit for. Yesterday, I was listening to Joel Hopkinson talk about how they turn the heating off at Canterbury Cathedral. And actually, there is an amazing sort of thermal reservoir in the stone, and it doesn't get too hot and it doesn't get too cold. And actually, that's a building that performs really well. I mean, you don't live in the cathedral, so maybe it doesn't have to be quite the same standards of comfort as a home. But actually, sometimes I think you just need to trust the buildings to do what they're good at. I think the other thing that I would say is that actually a lot of the parts that historic buildings are made out of have a lifespan anyway. A slate roof might last 80 to 100 years. You'd expect to replace it. You'd expect to replace timbers in windows. You'd expect to replace guttering. Almost every part of a building you would have to expect to replace at some point in its life. And if you're therefore saying, well, actually, I need to bring forward the replacement of this roof so that it has better thermal properties or it's better able to deal with intense rainfall, I don't think that is actually harm. And I think some of the language around heritage consents is sometimes unhelpful, because I don't think that is harmful. I think it is a good thing, because you are bringing longer life to a building that has stood for many centuries, and you're safeguarding it to be able to contribute in all the different ways that it does for many, many more years. And actually, that roof would have to be replaced at some point anyway.
So I'm a builder. I've got much life left near that one. We're talking about protecting the buildings, protecting the heritage, but Christine, we're also, we've got a skill set of people who can do those jobs, but also we can take advantage of sort of modern digital skills. I wonder where you think that balance should be, that we're pushing forward, but not losing those essential skills. I think Richard's got some of those in his back pocket himself, but as we say.
Yeah, I think it's a very delicate balance, because obviously the introduction of AI and obviously drone technology is amazing to like improve health and safety standards on sites. So the ability to do surveys where historically you would have to erect a scaffold, which in and of itself you might need to fix to the building and could cause harm that needs to be obviously made good. You can use those drone technologies to identify where the problems are, where is that block gutter, where is that underperformance in the fabric. But what I would be slightly tentative about is the possibility of 3D scanning or 3D printing of sort of ashlar blocks, or sort of having a technology where it's all done by sort of robotics in the future. I think what's really special about the historic buildings I work on are the perfect imperfections, the kind of the tooling, the workmanship, sometimes where things didn't quite go possibly as the mason had intended, but that creates a bit of a quirk, a bit of interest in the building of, maybe he was having a bad day or he had to leave site early, so he didn't quite finish doing the carving as he'd intended. I think some of those things can really add interest to the building and tell the story of the people who've been working on it. And some other really great social value I've been hearing about recently is how you can bring the community into this as well, and the opportunity for members of the community to almost like etch their initials on the underside of a slate, so that when you do reslate a building, you can obviously improve its climate resilience and performance, but the local community can also engage with the building that's within their stewardship, because heritage isn't for the local authority and the building owner, it's for the communities where that heritage exists. I think little tools like that could be something quite interesting in the future to be sort of further developed.
Toby, could I just
Please, yeah, of course.
Digital aspect, because on so many of our projects we are seeing at the moment this amazing synthesis of digital techniques and highly skilled traditional crafts. At Stowe, all the timber recess was CNC cut, and then the craftsman would come in and just give it that personality at the end. The carving that is being done at the Temple Church, all of the stones were three-dimensionally scanned. They were then 3D printed in clay, so that the lost detail could be built up in clay to understand the surface before there was 800 years of erosion. That could then be 3D printed. So there was this use of both scanning, digital technology, modeling, printing, maquetting as part of that creative process. But then which defines the carved surface, but then Nina, our carver, who is an incredibly skilled craftsman, she has stipulated, because the Romanesque has this life sort of vitality and sort of irregularity in it, she's stipulated that all of her carvers set out everything by hand, so they're not there, so that things are asymmetrical. And she's also deliberately brought in younger carvers for whom working on this project would make a real difference to them at this point in their career. And I think stories like that just give so much hope, both for how digital can be used to enhance rather than compromise traditional skills, but also how some of the master craftsmen of today are taking really active steps to bring on the next generation of skilled craftsmen.
Yeah, thanks, Alistair. Yeah, point very much worth making. Richard, I want to ask you whether there's, on the jobs when you're on the tools, we can tell whether you went home early and left shortcuts. That's not the question I'm going to ask you. But I feel like you've probably inherently got a defense of those kind of traditional skills, but I wonder how you square that with knowing that you need to take advantage of the sort of digital offerings, I suppose, that we've been speaking about just now.
Sure. I did go home early some days. However, I also went back on many more occasions to check my work. So
Never doubted you.
I squared my conscience on that one. I think I'm really keen on an analogy as I've moved through developing into a consultant within heritage and a building surveyor. And I have this analogy in my head, which I currently work with, is understand the jigsaw. The jigsaw that you're working in, which is essentially the constraints or the times that you're living. And at the moment, it is sustainability, if you like, that it's, say, the driving force for change and funding, etc. And I think part of that jigsaw is digital tools and then how we incorporate those. And I think the key part for me is that whatever digital tools we're using, us as humans are still the decision makers. I refuse to be lost, to find myself being second to artificial intelligence. You know, it's a tool. We're still decision makers. And fundamental to all those things that we do is we have the conversations that we need to have. And going back to the jigsaw, you need all the people in the room relevant to the thing that you're trying to achieve to do. And then you have that conversation. And we go through the REBA stages. I hope everyone's familiar with those. And that's feasibility stage, concept stage, and developing into the coordinated design, etc. You have those conversations. So all of those things that might challenge it, or if you're using tools, digital tools, and what's the impact of this on what you're hoping to achieve, you can have those conversations. And at the end, you can then decide we're now ready to move on.
Makes a lot of sense. So a really positive landscape view, no problems, excellent, everything's going fine. Tom, let me just come to you for a second on that. Obviously, your focus is London and the South East, but I wonder if you could sort of cast your net across the country. Do you feel that this is representative? What other things, what challenges are we looking at? Do we have a good national spread of the projects we're doing? Does that need to be shaken up a bit?
We've talked about skills, particularly in relation to the emergence of digital technologies, but there is clearly an issue with skills across the country to deliver heritage projects. We all know on a really small scale, dealing with our own house, how hard it is to get a specialist contractor to do lime plastering. I mean, we've now got a name. But on a larger scale, we know that's being played out across the country. And very often those kind of heritage skills are held by small contractors who very often are close to retirement. And there is a real danger that we lose the ability to repair historic buildings. And we know from our research and talking to lots of contractors that those that specialise in heritage work are having to turn down more work than other kinds of trades because they don't have enough of the skilled practitioners to deliver those. So there is a skills shortage across the country. I suppose people will think London, the South East, you're probably relatively well served. It's true across the country that there is a skills shortage. So we do need to think really hard about how we train up the next generation of practitioners. And I was really interested to hear what Alistair was saying about kind of apprenticeships and bringing young people into the field. That feels to me really, really important. We need to find ways of bringing those skills through in construction apprenticeships and in training establishments that don't offer that at the moment, despite the huge opportunity. I've spent a bit of time at our stand in the Royal Armouries, and a lot of contractors have come up to me and said they think heritage is actually a real opportunity area for them. It's where their business is growing because the demand is there. It's great. And that's just the kind of traditional skills aspect of it. Thinking also about retrofit, and we've heard some really good stories here about retrofitting historic buildings. We know in order to get to net zero, by 2050. We need a huge number of new jobs, not just heritage skills, but how to install a heat pump, how to project manage the process. About 100,000 new jobs a year over the next 20 or so years in order to get there. There is a huge opportunity there, but also a challenge, and we have to find a way to meet that challenge.
Perfect. Which I think brings us on to this subject of kind of collaboration. I think it's fair we go on to talk about. So we've got lots of problems. We've got lots of people with different areas of expertise. Bringing them all together can be the solution. A bit like our panel here. You know, I know you guys behind the scenes sometimes work together, often work together. Can you explore that a bit for me? How important is that idea of collaboration?
I think it's really important. And I was actually going to pick up on it because we went to a panel discussion and Canterbury Cathedral were there. And they mentioned that they had their own sort of in-house stonemasons.
Brilliant.
And I was kind of thinking, well, do they join up? Do the different sort of heritage sort of asset custodians join up and say, well, we can work together to sort of pool our resources because we don't need it all at any one time, and that in itself can help to, I suppose, keep those skills alive.
Yeah.
Does that happen in your in what you've seen?
It does. I mean, I'm certainly aware that cathedrals across the country are developing kind of centres of excellence for training and those sorts of skills, and I think they do share that expertise. I'm not close enough to be familiar with it. Maybe other members of the panel are.
They do. So on our project at Temple Church, they bought, so both the Temple Church and Canterbury shared a truckload of Cairn stone. So they were both very excited that good Cairn stone is now coming out of France again. Let's get a truckload and let's club together. And it was blocked in Canterbury, and then it's a real collaboration. But that collaboration comes from the people involved knowing each other and having to work. And having to work together.
It's the conversations, isn't it? And that's the thing that digital can never replace.
Totally.
It's sharing those problems and those solutions.
Richard, do you want to jump in? I think you were saying you wanted to do. I was only comment just to say I think. I can't remember what it is. Is it Winchester Cathedral? They've had a very long, strong tradition of their own masons, haven't they? Lots of cathedrals do. I think it's Winchester. Is that right? Yeah. So they've done that, and that's just gone on and on and on. And many cathedrals have got very strong links, obviously, with stonemasons.
York Minster as well.
Yeah.
Chester.
To my bingo card of amazing places we need to fix up. And just for you then, I guess, Christine, with that idea of collaboration, of balancing skills, is that the sort of message you're seeing coming through in your projects too?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well to sort of the points of my fellow panelists, I think one of the key things is young people seeing themselves in that role and sort of having the accessibility of young people in schools to say, I could be a stonemason, I could slate a roof. Because I think for a lot of young people, there's a lot of still emphasis on going to university, to college. But in terms of the trade skills, there's a real sense of sort of ownership and satisfaction at the end of the day, which I'm sure you must have really experienced being on the tools. And I think it's about giving young people the opportunity to go to site, walk the scaffold, see it in action and sort of see themselves within that skill set. And I think that could be something really exciting in the future. And how do we promote that within the education system?
Perfect, thank you. Richard, I want to come on regulation a little bit, just because what we're talking about here is if you guys had free form to do what you wanted to do, there'll be some amazing things done, it will be fine. But I wonder whether you're finding at the moment regulations are working for you, whether you want to see some changes. What's your thought on that?
Regulation in terms of legislation?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And the planning policy overall, my experience of it, I would say, has been positive. There are always challenges, but I am, and with the rest of the panelists too, this idea of collaboration. I know it's an important word. I don't think it's overused, but I do sometimes think, do we all really understand what collaboration means? Because we do fall into our own siloed mentalities. We can't help but do that. Overall, my experience of it, regulations that we work under, we have to have some structures. They have to be there. I think what's really important is that we are able to challenge them. Now, sometimes that's really difficult. I worked on a project in Whitehall and it was a sort of retrofit project. It was a really interesting project because, to begin with, the initial ideas from the architects, so it wasn't my fault, I'm a building surveyor, got rejected by Westminster. And so, there were internally, there were some crosswords about, well, there's a lot of time spent going through that REBA 3 design stage for it to be rejected. But the long story short, the project at the end of it was really super successful for lots and lots of reasons. And I thought that the planning process was really important in that because they stopped it. Historic England, actually, we had conversations with them. They were really supportive of it in principle. And we talked about the ideas. So we had that idea of managed change. And so it was like, yes, we can look to make these changes to the buildings, but the arbiters of the decisions were Westminster. And they've got such a big manor, as I used to refer to it, of which they are ultimate custodians of in a way. And they said no. And of course, they have to take that. They're the people that say no all the time. So I kind of felt for them a bit, but at the end of the day, it was really successful. So for me, in my experience in heritage, I've always seen it as being really important, and it's been a positive experience. But as I say, I think we need to be able to challenge with the do nothing, do something principle.
Fair enough. Tom, I'd love a bit of a policy chat with you, if that's possible. Not just the two of us. I mean, how do you kind of walk that line between protective and overprotective?
I'll answer that as the second part of my answer, but I think in relation to that point about the planning process, it feels to me that the structures are right, but it's a bit too difficult at the moment. There's a lot of paperwork, tens of thousands of pages. It can take time. People don't always understand the decisions that have been made. And Richard's example there it is a good one. So I think part of what Historic England can do is to help to streamline that process. And I think it's really important that happens. And we've talked a lot about collaboration, and the easiest way to do that is to talk about these things earlier. As early as possible in the process, work out what it is everyone is trying to achieve, and then collaborate to find a solution that, as far as possible, does everything that everyone wants to achieve. That's the kind of the ideal. It doesn't happen enough. People don't talk early enough, in my experience. They tend to then wait until the end and then get a bit frustrated. So my key point here is talk early and collaborate, and it's actually not that difficult. I said I was going to answer your question's second part, but I forgot what it was. Toby, can you remind me?
I was trying to, all the way through that, I was going to remember the question because he's going to forget and I'm going to have to do it. So it's draw that line between being protective versus overprotective.
Okay, it's always a balance, isn't it? We know whenever we approach a site that there will be competing interests. And the thing I don't particularly like about the planning system is it feels a bit transactional. It's a bit, there's a bit of harm here and we'll give you a bit of benefit there. And, it becomes a bit of a trade-off. Yeah. Whereas I feel like it should be a system in which we all work together to achieve the best possible solution, as I've just said. So I've gone off tangent again, haven't I? But the key thing is that we all are, I think you've come here because you're interested in heritage. We want the best outcome for buildings, but we have to recognise that they need to change. They need to adapt. We need to adapt to a changing climate. We need to adapt to the changing needs of buildings and their occupants. And actually, historic buildings are really flexible. There are some great examples in here of buildings which have been quite radically changed in order to bring them into new uses, and they are fabulous in those new ways. So we have to be open to the idea that historic buildings need to change. They always have done. But it's a balance. We're constantly balancing competing interests. But let's do it in a positive way. Let's try and find good solutions rather than setting up barriers and trying to sort of argue over things. Let's work together in a positive way to make that balance work.
Thanks, Tom. So what we're talking about balance. I mean, there's the one, of course, between ambition and affordability, which I suppose is a conversation you probably have all the time. But I wonder how do you get that right? And is it always a compromise on that?
Well, it's always a balance, and you've got to find a sort of pragmatic solution to all of those kind of competing demands. And there's a lot of work, I suppose, at feasibility stage, at early design stages, to sort of talk and work through what the options might be. what the priorities might be. And it's all about priorities and what you want to achieve at the end, and how you're going to achieve that sort of that cost benefit analysis. And then I suppose you've also got to think about your long-term running costs. It's, what you do now might be the cheaper option, but actually maintaining it, operating it for the long term might be a different answer. So you've got to think through the whole project life cycle and what you're going to leave at the end. And then when you leave it at the end, you know that in 30 years' time, the same group, another group of people are going to come back, and they're going to be having the same conversations about, well, what do we do next? What were these people thinking when they did this refurbishment 30 years ago? Why did they do that? And actually, was there some logical thinking there that means that those interventions they made, we can reuse those, or we can build on that?
Yeah. So where does that long-term master planning come in for you, so that the 30-year crew won't come back and go, that's the guy who's involved.
He did it.
Yeah.
I think a certain amount of that will be inevitable, because nothing is ever quite as unfashionable as the recent past. And the last guys who are there are generally the bad guys. But I think thinking long-term is always critical, because, as Sophia's saying, with all of our projects, we won't, we're not the first often to have worked on that building. We certainly won't be the last. On some of those projects, which, the building may be 800-900 years old, there have been so many hands, so many times that things have been replaced. There'll be new work in 50 years, 100 years. And I think being able to think, do we need to do this now, is really important, or is what's there okay, and maybe it can wait. That's one of the easiest ways to value engineer a project, is just not to do a bit, because it works fine now. I think there is an aspect of this which comes down to owners taking a long-term view, and I think that's both private owners and it's public sector developers, but the ability for the owners and custodians of these buildings to take a view that spans not just years but decades and centuries is hugely important. And you can see that very tangibly in those estates which have been in the same ownership, things like the Oxbridge colleges, or earlier this year I was down at Rousham, where the garden is just absolutely stunning, but it has been in the family ownership for 500 years, and therefore it hasn't had different owners wanting to take it in different ways, and there has been a continuity, and they've been able to do the bits that were needed at that right point in time. So it is balancing the benefits of transformation with actually how much do we need to do right now, and can we save some for 30, 50, 100 years in the future?
Fair enough. How do you get that balance right, Christine? How do you make sure that your projects have got that forward-thinking hat on?
I think in some ways it's about need and identifying what the need is at that time. And it can be quite challenging to sort of look even 5 years in the future, never mind 15. No one saw COVID coming. And then all of a sudden the way we all live and work changed sort of almost overnight. So it is incredibly challenging to sort of build in that resilience and that adaptability. I think one of the key things will always be access and inclusion, which is something we've not quite touched on yet in this session, but also physical accessibility, inclusion, and social accessibility and inclusion. Culture changes, people change, and just how do you make these places really welcoming and accessible to everyone in both of those ways? So that's something that, again, at BDP, we're really passionate about, and sort of seeing how historic places can sort of take that on as part of their long-term future.
Fair enough. And just sort of final thought on you for that, Richard. Is that echo what you're doing as well? Because it seems to be a similar approach, I guess.
Yeah, sure. Same with what he says, and just to follow on, we haven't touched on often in heritage the real thorny issues of fire, data, access, and security, and we can't predict what's going to happen next. Recently, we've had the Terrorism Act, Martin's Law, that's introducing changes to some of these big venue places where access requirements are now moved up to the top of the priority list. And then to follow on also from what Sophia said, I think often what's missed actually is this operations and maintenance phase. And if you do want to plan for the future, the key people involved in some of the sort of bigger estates. I'm working on one at the moment for Cardiff University. So their operations and maintenance, their FM teams, they're the drivers for that. They're the key stakeholders. Obviously, a range of other stakeholders sit behind them, but we're working with them in order to safeguard their heritage estate, which is in Cardiff Centre, Cathays Park, which is where the Welsh Parliament building is, an extremely fine civic centre. The need was born out of the O&M phase because there's a huge amount of problems on their heritage buildings that are failing and want repairs, and how do they do this? So we're engaging in a conservation management plan with them to understand significance and look to where you can carry out those repairs. Then we're looking to engage with the local authority and do a heritage partnership agreement where they can carry out those repairs on a sort of a basis where consent through the normal LBC route is not required, saving time and money on people like me. But they are key in that phase for what you do moving forward and safeguarding going into the future. O&M for me and how that capital expenditure decides to be spent by the owners of those estates. They're really important questions to have with the people in the room.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
A round of applause, please, for that. That brings this heritage episode from UK Reef to a close, so thank you for listening. If you enjoyed it, then please like, subscribe, leave a review, tell your friends and colleagues, and of course, feel free to plug it on social media. Until next time, thank you very much and goodbye.